My brother Hector cornered me at Mom's wake, voice dripping sympathy. "Terry, you're barely holding it together, forgetting names, repeating yourself. Let me handle the funeral costs, the estate paperwork. You just rest." He had witnesses, the funeral director, Mom's neighbors, all nodding at my confusion. He pulled out pre-signed contracts, his receipts for flowers I never ordered. "See. You already agreed. Just sign the executor transfer." The room watched me fumble with my reading glasses, ramble about Mom's garden. They saw a grieving, senile old man. Perfect. The viewing room at Bartlett and Sons smelled like something trying too hard to cover up something else. Lilies, chemical carpet cleaner, and underneath it all that faint sweet rot smell that clings to places where bodies are prepared. The overhead lights hummed, a fluorescent buzz that made the back of my skull ache. I stood in the corner by the folding table where they'd set out store-brand cookies on a plastic tray, holding a styrofoam cup of coffee that tasted like burned tire rubber. My late father's watch sat loose on my wrist, the leather band cracked and soft from 40 years of his sweat and then 15 of mine. The second hand ticked forward. 3:47 in the afternoon. I was counting. I'm always counting. 43 years as a court clerk teaches you that time is evidence. The casket they'd picked was mahogany, glossy and absurd. Mom would have hated it. She was a woman who kept her furniture covered in plastic and washed out Ziploc bags to reuse. The price tag on that box was probably more than her first car. I hadn't selected it. Hadn't been consulted. The dress they'd put her in was wrong too, some pale blue thing with lace at the collar. Mom wore cotton house dresses and cardigans with pilled elbows. On the guest book table sat an itemized invoice, printed on cream-colored card stock with embossed lettering. Bartlett and Sons Funeral Services. $14,750. My signature was not on it. Hector worked the room like a man running for office. Navy Brooks Brothers suit, fresh from the dry cleaner, creased sharp enough to cut bread. Italian leather shoes that clicked on the linoleum with each step, announcing his presence. His cologne reached me before he did, something expensive and cloying that coated the inside of my nose. He was always the successful one. Senior vice president at some tech firm whose name changed every 18 months. Six-figure salary he'd mention casually over Thanksgiving turkey. German sedan in the driveway that cost more than I'd made in 2 years. I drove a Honda Civic from 2011 with a check engine light that had been on since the Obama administration. He shook hands, accepted condolences, his voice carrying across the room in that practiced way of men who've learned to perform grief for an audience. Mrs. Henderson from Mom's church had me cornered by the lilies, her papery hand on my forearm, her voice soft and sad. "You seemed so confused at the hospital last week, Terry. So unlike yourself. Poor dear." I let my eyes go vague, let my mouth work around a response that didn't quite form. Hector appeared at 3:47 exactly, bringing reinforcements. The funeral director, a thin man with soft hands and a practiced expression of sympathy. Bill Kowalski from next door to Mom's house, retired postal worker, good man, uncomfortable. Father Murphy, who'd known our family for 30 years. An audience. "Terry, buddy." Hector's hand landed on my shoulder, heavy and proprietary, fingers squeezing just a fraction too hard. "We need to talk about the arrangements." His voice wasn't soft. It carried. It was meant to. I blinked at him, letting a beat pass. 2 beats. Let my hand tremble slightly on the styrofoam cup, the coffee inside it gone cold and filmy. "Struggling," I repeated, my voice thin, reedy, uncertain. He pulled a manila folder from under his arm, the kind with the metal clasp, and spread papers across the credenza like a card dealer showing his hand. "Look, I've already handled the funeral costs. 14,000. I have the receipts. And I've been coordinating with Bartlett here about the burial plot, the headstone, the catering for tomorrow." The funeral director nodded, solemn, complicit. "Mr. Hector has been very thorough, very organized." I fumbled with my reading glasses, the drugstore kind with the plastic frames, making a show of pulling them from my shirt pocket, nearly dropping them, finally getting them perched crooked on my nose. "I thought we were going to discuss, Terry, you called me 3 times yesterday asking what day the funeral was." Hector's voice was patient, loud, sympathetic in that performance way that makes you want to break teeth. You forgot you'd already asked. Bill here had to drive you home from Safeway last week because you couldn't remember where you'd parked. Bill Kowalski shifted his weight, his face flushed. Well, it was a big parking lot. The point is, Hector cut in, you need help. And I'm your brother. I'm here to help. He slid a document toward me, the paper crisp and white and official looking. This is just an executor transfer form. It lets me handle Mom's estate, pay her final bills, distribute assets. You don't need to worry about complicated financial stuff. You just need to grieve. I stared at the form. The text swam slightly, not because I couldn't read it but because I was reading it very carefully while appearing not to. Paragraph 3, Section B. Transfer of fiduciary duty. Pre-filled. My name in the relinquishing party box. His name in successor executor. The signature line at the bottom waiting. I already signed as witness, Father Murphy offered, his voice kind, guileless. It's really for the best, Terence. The room was watching. Mrs. Henderson. Bill Kowalski. The funeral director with his soft hands. Father Murphy. They were all nodding, all thinking the same thing. Poor Terry. Lost without his mother. Can't handle the details. Good thing Hector is here. Good thing someone competent is taking charge. My brother's cologne was making my sinuses throb. I could see a small stain on his collar, just visible above his tie knot, a spot where he'd missed shaving cream that morning. His breath smelled like the mints he sucked constantly, trying to cover the coffee and whatever else. He was sweating slightly despite the over-air-conditioned room, a faint sheen on his forehead. Nerves. Excitement. The thrill of a plan coming together. I let my hand tremble as I reached for the pen he was holding out. Let my fingers brush past it once, twice, before finally grasping it. The ballpoint was cheap plastic, the kind you get free from a bank. I held it over the signature line. The second hand on my father's watch ticked forward. 3:51. 4 minutes had passed since Hector had cornered me. 4 minutes of performance. 4 minutes of documentation. Every word spoken. Every witness gathered. Every premature claim of authority. I was recording it all, not on tape but in the part of my brain that had spent 4 decades filing motions and tracking deadlines and watching people lie under oath and then watching them pay for it. The pen touched paper. My signature came out shaky, uncertain, the letters malformed. I dated it wrong, writing January 29th instead of January 30th. An error. A confused old man's error. Hector didn't even check. He just smiled, squeezed my shoulder again, that proprietary squeeze, and tucked the form into his leather portfolio. You're doing the right thing, he said. The right thing. I nodded, let my eyes well up slightly, turned away. Through the viewing room window I could see the parking lot, the rows of cars baking in the afternoon sun. My Civic was parked in the back row, unremarkable, forgettable. In the trunk was a lockbox I'd bought from a county auction in 1998 for $75. Inside that lockbox was a document Hector didn't know existed. My mother's last will and testament, executed on September 14, 2025, witnessed by her attorney Dorothy Chen and notarized by a certified public notary. Filed with the county probate clerk's office on September 18 at 9:47 in the morning. Receipt stamped. Case number 2025-Pro-08847. Official record. Inside that lockbox was also a recording device I'd purchased from Radio Shack back when Radio Shack still existed, analog, reliable, legal in our one-party consent state. The kind of device that doesn't rely on batteries that die or digital files that corrupt. The kind that just works. I hadn't turned it on yet. Didn't need to. Not yet. But I would. The mass started at 10:03. I sat in the front pew, my hands folded in my lap, my head bowed. I prayed, but not for my mother's soul. Mom didn't need my prayers. She'd been clear-eyed and sharp until the end, and if there was a God he'd already made up his mind about Margaret Rose Wilcox. I prayed for precision. For timing. For the patience to let a trap close completely before springing it. The overhead lights hummed. The priest's voice droned. Hector sat 2 feet away from me, his expensive suit rustling every time he shifted, his cologne a cloud. He checked his phone once during the homily, a quick glance, subtle. He thought he was being discreet. He wasn't. His thumbs moved in that practiced way of a man typing a message. Probably to his lawyer. Probably something about timeline, about asset transfer, about how easy this was going to be. The second hand on my father's watch ticked forward. I was counting. Always counting. I drove home in the Civic, the unsigned document folded in my jacket pocket. The dashboard clock glowed green in the fading light. 5:23. The funeral home was behind me, the stink of lilies still caught in my clothes. My head throbbed from the fluorescent lights and Hector's cologne and the effort of playing weak for 2 hours straight. The roads were empty, that dead time between rush hour and dinner when the suburbs go quiet. I kept the radio off. Needed the silence. Needed to think. My house sat at the end of Maple Drive, a 3-bedroom ranch I'd paid off in 1994. Tan siding, brown trim, a lawn I mowed myself with a push mower from Sears that was older than most people's children. The neighbors had those riding mowers, the kind that cost thousands and made them look like they were playing a video game. I had a Craftsman with a pull start that fought me every spring and a bag that had to be emptied every 20 minutes. It worked. That was enough. Inside, the house smelled like old coffee and the lemon furniture polish I used once a month. The thermostat was set to 68, same as always. I didn't believe in paying to heat empty rooms. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors, the planks creaking in familiar places. The kitchen. The hallway. The spare bedroom that Hector had seen once, maybe twice, with its desk from Staples and its filing cabinet from Office Depot and its general air of a room that wasn't used for anything important. That wasn't where I was going. I went to the basement. The door was next to the water heater, easy to overlook. The stairs were steep, the kind that punished your knees on the way down and your lungs on the way up. The air got cooler with each step, that particular basement cold that seeps into your bones. Concrete floor, exposed joists, a single bulb hanging from a wire that I had to pull a chain to activate. The light came on with a click, harsh and yellow. In the corner sat a steel filing cabinet I'd bought from a county auction for $75 in 1998. 4 drawers, fire-rated, government surplus. The lock still worked. I'd kept the key on my ring for 28 years, a small brass thing worn smooth. It turned with a satisfying click. The top drawer held the accordion folder labeled in my handwriting from September. M.R.W. Estate, 2025. Inside was the document Hector didn't know existed. 12 pages, laser printed on 24-pound cotton paper. Last will and testament of Margaret Rose Wilcox. Executed September 14, 2025. Witnessed by Dorothy Chen, attorney at law, and notarized by Sarah Kim, Certified Notary Public, Commission Number 874321. Page 4, Section 3. I, Margaret Rose Wilcox, being of sound mind and body, do hereby name my son Terence Michael Wilcox as sole executor of my estate and primary beneficiary of all assets including but not limited to real property located at 47 Willow Crest Drive, all bank accounts held at First National Bank, and all personal property contained therein. Page 9, Section 7, the Punishment Clause. If my son Hector James Wilcox contests this will or attempts to interfere with its execution through legal action or fraudulent claims, he shall receive nothing from this estate and shall be permanently barred from any claim to my assets. She'd been clear. Clinical. Angry in that quiet way that ran in our family like a blood type. I'd filed this will with the county probate clerk's office on September 18 at 9:47 in the morning. I remembered the date because it was a Wednesday and I'd had to skip my usual coffee with Bill Kowalski to make the drive downtown. The clerk who'd processed it was a young woman named Amanda, new hire, still learning the system. I'd walked her through the filing procedure, shown her which forms to stamp, which to scan, which to file in the physical archive. Old habits. She'd thanked me, called me sir, handed me the receipt with the case number printed in 12-point courier. 2025-Pro-08847. Official record. Public record. Searchable by anyone who knew where to look. Hector hadn't looked. I pulled out the accordion folder and set it on my workbench, a slab of plywood on sawhorses that had served me for 30 years. Next to it I placed the lockbox, combination lock, 3 digits I'd set to my father's birth year. Inside the lockbox was the recording device, the Radio Shack Special from 2008, before everything went digital and fragile. Analog tape, physical buttons, a microphone that picked up everything within 15 feet. I'd used it exactly twice. Once to record a city council meeting when I was fighting a zoning change in 2010. Once to record a conversation with a contractor who was trying to overcharge me for roof repairs in 2013. Both times it had worked perfectly. Both times the recording had ended arguments immediately. Facts have that effect. I sat down on the metal folding chair, the same one I'd had since my first apartment in 1979. The seat was cold through my slacks. My knees ached from the basement stairs. I was 69 years old and my body reminded me of it every time I sat down or stood up or did anything other than remain perfectly still. On the workbench in front of me I spread out the evidence. Mom's real will. The receipt from the probate clerk's office. The business card Dorothy Chen had given me in September, cream-colored card stock with raised lettering. Chen and Associates, Family Law and Estate Planning. Her cell phone number written on the back in her neat handwriting. Call anytime, Terry. I mean it. Next to that I placed the document Hector had made me sign. The executor transfer form with my shaky signature and the wrong date. The form that was legally void because you cannot transfer executor authority that hasn't been granted yet. The form that was evidence of fraud because it claimed authority Hector didn't have over an estate he didn't control. I pulled out my yellow legal pad, the same brand I'd used for 43 years. The paper was slightly rough, took ink well, didn't bleed through. I wrote in the same blue ballpoint I'd always used, the cheap Bic kind that came in packs of 12. At the top of the page I wrote the date. January 30th, 2026. Below that, timeline. 9:47 a.m., September 18th, 2025. Will filed. Official record established. January 28th, 2026. Mom dies. Estate enters probate waiting period. 14 days required by law before any filing. January 30th, 2026. Hector presents executor transfer form. No legal authority. Fraudulent claim. I tapped the pen against the paper, thinking. Hector was always impatient. Always cutting corners. Always convinced he was smarter than the system. In high school he'd cheated on his SATs, hired some college kid to take them for him. Got caught. Dad had to call in favors to keep it off his record. In his 20s he'd run up credit card debt buying stocks on margin, lost everything, came crying to Mom for a bailout. She'd given it to him. $12,000 she'd saved from her grocery budget over 5 years. He'd never paid it back. Last summer he'd borrowed $8,000 from her checking account. Direct transfer, no permission, just took it. When she'd confronted him he'd said it was a loan, he'd pay it back with interest, she knew he was good for it. He never paid it back. That was when she'd called Dorothy Chen. That was when she'd had the will drawn up with the punishment clause. That was when she'd asked me to be there, to witness, to file it properly. He thinks I'm a fool, she'd said, sitting in Dorothy's office, her hands folded in her lap, her voice steady. He thinks you're a fool too, Terry. Prove him wrong. I'd spent 69 years not proving anyone wrong. I'd spent 69 years being the quiet one, the steady one, the one who didn't make waves. I'd been a court clerk, not a lawyer. I filed papers. I stamped forms. I explained procedures to people who didn't understand them. I went home at 5 p.m. I mowed my lawn. I clipped coupons. I drove a car with a check engine light and wore suits from JCPenney and ate leftovers for lunch. Hector had the fancy job and the German car and the expensive cologne. Hector made 6 figures and took vacations to places I couldn't pronounce. Hector was the successful one. I was the one who'd never left the county I was born in. That was the story everyone knew. That was the story Hector believed. It was a lie. Not the facts. The facts were accurate. I did drive a Civic. I did clip coupons. I did wear drugstore reading glasses. But the conclusion was wrong. People looked at those facts and saw weakness. They saw a man who'd settled. A man who didn't have ambition or intelligence or capability. They were looking at the wrong data. I'd spent 43 years in the court system. 43 years watching people lie and cheat and scheme. 43 years watching those same people get destroyed when they forgot one filing deadline, one procedural rule, one piece of evidence. I'd watched millionaires lose everything because they'd notarized a document in the wrong county. I'd watched inheritance cases collapse because someone filed 24 hours too early. I'd watched fraud prosecutions hinge on a single recorded phone call. I knew how the system worked. Not theoretically. Practically. Procedurally. I knew which forms had to be filed when. I knew which signatures had to be witnessed. I knew what evidence was admissible and what wasn't. I knew how to build a case that couldn't be challenged. That was my real resource. Not money. Not connections. Knowledge. Precision. Patience. Hector thought he was setting a trap. He'd gathered witnesses at the funeral home. He'd created a narrative of my confusion. He'd gotten me to sign a form that looked official. He thought he was being clever. He was being sloppy. Every step he'd taken was evidence. Every witness he'd gathered would testify under oath. Every document he'd filed would be examined. Every premature claim of authority would be proof of fraud. He was building my case for me. I just had to let him finish. I looked at the legal pad, at the timeline I'd written. Below it I added one more line. Let him file. Let him commit. The basement was cold. My knees ached. My head still throbbed from the fluorescent lights. I was 69 years old and I was tired. But I wasn't weak. I'd never been weak. I'd just been careful. Hector was about to learn the difference. I gathered the documents, placed them back in the accordion folder, locked the filing cabinet. The recording device stayed on the workbench. I'd need it soon. The stairs were harder going up than coming down. My knees popped with each step. By the time I reached the kitchen I was breathing hard, my heart rate elevated. I poured myself a glass of water from the tap, drank it standing at the sink. Through the window I could see my neighbor's house, their riding mower parked in the garage, their motion sensor lights already on even though the sun was barely down. Wasteful. I'd installed a timer on my porch light years ago. Came on at dusk, off at 10 p.m. Saved maybe $3 a month on electric. Over 20 years that was $720. People thought I was cheap. I was efficient. There's a difference. I finished the water, rinsed the glass, placed it in the dish rack to dry. Tomorrow was the funeral. Hector would be there, playing the grieving son, gathering more witnesses, building his narrative. I'd let him. I'd play my part. Confused. Grieving. Overwhelmed. And then he'd file his petition. Too early. Too confident. Too sloppy. And then I'd move. Not in anger. Not in grief. In procedure. My father's watch showed 6:07. The second hand ticked forward. I was counting. Always counting. The funeral was Thursday, 10 in the morning, St. Catherine's Catholic Church on the east side of town where Mom had gone every Sunday for 40 years. I arrived early, pulling into the gravel parking lot at 9:37, the Civic's engine ticking as it cooled. The church was red brick, built in the 50s, with a white steeple and stained glass windows that had been donated by families whose names were engraved on brass plaques in the vestibule. The McKennas. The O'Briens. The Kowalskis. Old neighborhood money, back when this part of town was new construction and full of young families moving out from the city. Now it was old people and empty nesters and the occasional young couple who couldn't afford anything better. I wore my only suit, the JCPenney two-piece I'd bought in 1998 for a cousin's wedding. Charcoal gray, polyester blend, worn shiny at the elbows and seat. It hung loose on me now, my frame thinner than it had been when I'd bought it. I'd lost weight after Dad died, then more after Mom got sick. Grief has a way of making food seem irrelevant. The pants were held up with a belt I'd punched an extra hole in using a screwdriver and a hammer. The shirt was white, cotton, frayed slightly at the collar. The tie was navy blue with thin diagonal stripes, a gift from Mom on my 40th birthday. I'd worn it to every funeral since. It felt appropriate. Inside the church the air was cool and smelled of incense and old wood and that particular mustiness of buildings that are only truly full one day a week. The pews were dark oak, polished smooth by decades of backs and hands. The kneelers were worn, the vinyl cracked and patched with duct tape. The stations of the cross hung on the walls, painted plaster figures in faded colors. I'd knelt in front of those same stations as a boy, my mother beside me, her lips moving in silent prayer. The memory sat in my chest like a stone. People were arriving, filing in quietly, whispering. Mrs. Henderson in a black dress and pillbox hat that looked like it was from the 60s. Bill Kowalski in a suit that pulled across his shoulders, uncomfortable. Father Murphy at the front, arranging his vestments, his face composed in that professional sympathy priests learn in seminary. I sat in the back pew, my hands folded in my lap, my head bowed. Let my shoulders slump. Let my breathing be audible, slightly labored. An old man struggling. An old man overwhelmed. Hector arrived at 9:45. I heard the car before I saw it, the deep purr of German engineering, the sound of money. The Audi A6, black, freshly washed, gleaming even in the overcast morning light. He parked close to the entrance, taking a spot clearly marked for handicapped parking. No placard. Didn't matter. Rules were for other people. He emerged with his wife Monica, her heels clicking on the pavement, her designer sunglasses covering half her face despite the clouds. She wore black, but it was that fashionable black, tailored, expensive, the kind you buy for occasions like this because you know you'll need it again and you want to look good. Hector wore a black suit, probably Hugo Boss or something equally expensive, with a white shirt and a black tie. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His hair was perfect, that silver at the temples look that men pay barbers good money to achieve. He carried a leather portfolio, the kind with a zipper and a handle, stuffed thick with papers. He saw me in the back pew and made his way over, Monica trailing behind, her perfume arriving before she did. Terry. His voice was soft, respectful, pitched for the church setting. How are you holding up? I blinked at him slowly, let my mouth work for a moment before words came out. It's a lot, Hector. It's just a lot. I know, buddy. I know. He sat down next to me, the pew creaking under his weight. Monica sat on his other side, already pulling out her phone, scrolling through something, bored. Listen, Hector said, keeping his voice low but not so low that others couldn't hear. We need to talk about a couple things before the service starts. Just quick administrative stuff. I nodded, let my head bob a little too much, like a bobblehead doll. Okay. Okay. He unzipped the portfolio, pulled out a stack of papers. I've been working on Mom's affairs. Just trying to get ahead of things, you know. There are deadlines, Terry. Legal deadlines. If we don't file the right paperwork at the right time, the estate could get tied up for months. Months. I stared at the papers, squinting even though I was wearing my reading glasses. What kind of deadlines? Probate stuff. Estate administration. He shuffled through the papers, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Look, I don't want to bore you with the details. That's why I'm handling it. But I need you to know that I've already taken some steps. Already. My voice cracked slightly. When? This morning, Terry. I went to the courthouse first thing. Filed the preliminary paperwork. Just standard stuff, but it had to be done within a certain window. I couldn't wait. My pulse didn't change. My breathing stayed steady. But internally, something clicked into place. He'd filed. Before probate opened. Before the mandatory waiting period. He'd committed the error I'd been waiting for. What kind of paperwork? I asked, letting confusion color my voice. Estate petition. Executor designation. Asset inventory requests. He waved his hand dismissively. Technical stuff. The point is, it's done. We're ahead of schedule. Now we just need to make sure we're on the same page going forward. He pulled out another document, the executor transfer form from yesterday. I brought this. I know you signed it yesterday, but I want to make sure you understand what it means. It just gives me the legal authority to handle Mom's estate. Pay her bills. Distribute her assets according to her wishes. Keep things simple. Keep things in the family. I took the paper with shaking hands, held it close to my face, squinted at it. My signature was there, shaky and malformed. The date was wrong. January 29th instead of January 30th. Hector hadn't noticed. Hadn't cared. He was moving too fast, too confident. I already signed this, I said. I know. But I want to make sure you're comfortable with it. That you understand. He leaned in closer, his cologne washing over me, something with bergamot and cedar that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Terry, I know this is hard. Losing Mom. Being alone. Trying to figure out what comes next. But you don't have to do it alone. That's what family is for. Let me take care of the complicated stuff. You just focus on grieving. On healing. The words were smooth, practiced, sympathetic. Underneath them was something else. Urgency. Pressure. The subtle threat of a man who needed compliance and needed it now. Mrs. Henderson walked past our pew, her eyes on us, her expression soft with pity. Poor Terry, I could almost hear her thinking. Lost without his mother. Thank goodness Hector is stepping up. Bill Kowalski sat 2 rows ahead, his shoulders stiff, his neck red. He was uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to me and the social pressure of witnessing what looked like a family helping itself. Father Murphy was watching from the altar, his expression neutral but attentive. Witnesses. All of them. Hector's witnesses, gathered to establish the narrative. Confused old men. Competent younger brother. Necessary intervention. I looked at the paper again, then at Hector. His eyes were bright, eager. Confident. He thought he'd won. Thought this was already over. Okay, I said softly. Okay, Hector. You handle it. You're good at this stuff. I never was. Relief flooded his face, genuine and ugly. He squeezed my shoulder, that proprietary grip I was learning to hate. You're doing the right thing, Terry. I promise. Mom would want this. She'd want you taken care of. He zipped the portfolio closed, the sound sharp in the quiet church. The papers inside were proof. Admission of premature filing. Claim of authority he didn't have. Fraudulent executor designation. All of it witnessed. All of it recorded in the minds and memories of everyone in this church. I let my head drop, let my shoulders shake slightly as if holding back tears. Hector stood, patted my back once, moved to the front pew where the family was supposed to sit. Monica followed, her heels echoing. I stayed in the back. Reached into my jacket pocket and felt the shape of the recorder I'd placed there before leaving the house. Analog. Simple. Reliable. I pressed the button. The tape inside began to turn, the mechanism so quiet it was inaudible beneath the church's ambient sound. The funeral mass started at 10:03. Father Murphy's voice rose and fell in the familiar cadences of ritual. The liturgy of death. The promise of resurrection. The comfort of routine. I didn't hear most of it. I was listening to something else. The sound of a trap closing. The click of a lock engaging. The moment when a man's arrogance becomes evidence. Hector sat in the front row, his head bowed at appropriate moments, his responses to the prayers clear and strong. He looked like a dutiful son. A responsible brother. A man doing the right thing. He looked like a liar who'd just confessed. The recorder in my pocket kept turning. The tape kept recording. And I kept counting. Always counting. Friday afternoon, 2:15, my phone rang. The screen showed Hector's name, the photo from 3 Christmases ago when he'd insisted on a family picture, his arm around my shoulders, his smile wide and white and empty. I let it ring twice before answering, long enough to seem like I'd been doing something slow, something that required effort. Hello. My voice came out thin, hesitant. Terry, hey. Hector's voice was different now. No more church whisper. No more careful sympathy. This was the voice of a man who'd won, who knew he'd won, who was ready to start collecting. Listen, I've got great news. I waited, said nothing. Let the silence stretch. He filled it, couldn't help himself. I met with Mom's bank this morning. First National. Showed them the executor paperwork, explained the situation. They were incredibly understanding. He paused, waiting for me to react. I gave him nothing. The thing is, Terry, they've agreed to transfer account access to me. Should be finalized by Monday morning. Once that happens, we can start settling Mom's affairs properly. Paying off her final expenses, distributing assets, all of that. Oh, I said. Just that. One syllable. Flat. I could hear him shifting, the sound of fabric moving, probably leaning back in his office chair, feet up, master of his domain. I know it's a lot to process, he continued. But this is good, Terry. This is what needed to happen. Now we can move forward without any bureaucratic delays. The bank lady, Sharon, super helpful, she walked me through everything. He was talking faster now, excited, the words tumbling over each other. And here's the thing, we need to meet Monday morning. 9 o'clock. I've scheduled a final review meeting at Bartlett & Sons. You know, the funeral home. Just to go over the last details. Final bill, death certificate copies, all the administrative stuff. Can you be there? I let a beat pass. 2 beats. Yes. I'll write it down. Good. Good. And Terry? Bring your checkbook. What? There are some outstanding expenses we need to split. You know, family contributions. It's only fair. The funeral costs, the flowers, some of Mom's final medical bills. I've been covering everything up front, but we should divide it properly. Brothers. Equal shares. My grip on the phone tightened. The plastic creaked slightly. How much? He laughed, actually laughed, a short bark of sound that held no humor. We'll go over the itemized list Monday. Nothing crazy. Maybe 4,000 or 5,000 on your end. Totally reasonable. I've got all the receipts. 4,000 or 5,000, I repeated, letting my voice shake. Hector, I don't know if I have that much. Sure you do, he said, and now there was an edge there, sharp and cold. You've got your pension. Your savings. Mom always said you were good with money. Cheap, but good with money. He laughed again at his own joke. Look, we'll figure it out Monday. Just be there. 9 a.m. sharp. Bartlett & Sons. Conference room. Don't be late, okay? I'll be there. I hung up before he could say anything else. Set the phone down on the kitchen table, the Formica cool and solid under my palm. My heart was beating hard, not fast but hard, each pulse a deliberate thud against my ribs. The kind of heartbeat you feel in your ears. $4,000 or $5,000 for expenses that didn't exist. For a funeral Mom had already paid for. For flowers I hadn't ordered. For bills that were fabricated. He wasn't just taking control of the estate. He was billing me for the privilege. I stood, my knees protesting, walked to the basement door. The stairs were no easier than they'd been 2 days ago. The concrete floor at the bottom was cold through my shoes. The filing cabinet waited in the corner, patient and silent. I unlocked it, pulled out the accordion folder, carried it back upstairs to the kitchen table where the light was better. Inside was everything. Mom's real will. The probate filing receipt. Dorothy Chen's card with her cell number on the back. I picked up the phone, dialed. She answered on the second ring. Chen and Associates, Dorothy speaking. Her voice was professional, brisk, the voice of a woman who billed by the hour and didn't waste them. Dorothy, it's Terry Wilcox. There was a pause, then warmth. Terry. How are you holding up? How was the funeral? It was appropriate, I said. And now we have a problem. I heard the shift in her tone, the lawyer clicking into place. Tell me. He filed an estate petition. Yesterday morning. Before probate opened. Before the waiting period. Claimed mom died without a will. Claimed executor authority he doesn't have. Silence on the other end. Not shocked silence. Thinking silence. Then, do you have documentation? I have everything. Mom's real will, filed in September with case number 2025-Pro-08847. I have his fraudulent executor transfer form with my signature obtained under false pretenses. I have a recording of him admitting he filed prematurely. And I have a meeting scheduled with him Monday morning at 9 a.m. where he's going to try to bill me for expenses that don't exist. More silence. Then a low whistle. Terry, how long were you a court clerk? 43 years. It shows, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. I'm filing an emergency counterpetition today. I'm going to request an expedited hearing. I'm going to attach your mother's will as evidence and request that Hector's petition be invalidated. But I need you to do something. What? Go to that meeting Monday. Let him perform. Let him present his fake invoices. Let him ask you for money. Record everything. Get him on tape making fraudulent claims. Can you do that? The recorder was still on the kitchen counter where I'd left it after the funeral. Analog. Simple. Reliable. I can do that. Good, Dorothy said. One more thing. I'm going to need you to come to my office tomorrow. Saturday. I know it's the weekend, but we need to prep. I need to review everything you have, make sure our documentation is airtight. This is going to move fast once I file. Can you be here at 10 a.m.? I'll be there. She gave me the address even though I already knew it, had been there with Mom back in September. We hung up. I sat at the kitchen table, the accordion folder open in front of me, Mom's will on top. 12 pages that represented clarity. Intention. Justice. My hands weren't shaking. My pulse had steadied. This wasn't grief anymore. This wasn't even anger. This was procedure. Protocol. The execution of a plan that had been in motion since September, since the moment Mom had looked at me across Dorothy's desk and said, "Prove him wrong." I pulled out my yellow legal pad, flipped to a new page, began writing. Monday meeting prep. Arrive early. Recorder in jacket pocket. Fresh batteries. Backup recorder in car. Let Hector speak first. Let him present invoices. Let him make demands. Record everything. Ask clarifying questions. Get him to repeat claims. Get him to state amounts. Get him on record claiming authority. Do not argue. Do not refuse. Do not reveal. Just document. I underlined the last word twice. Document. That was the weapon. Not emotion. Not confrontation. Evidence. Facts. Recorded proof of fraud spoken in his own voice. Outside the kitchen window the sun was setting, the sky going orange and purple, the neighborhood settling into evening. Someone was mowing their lawn, the sound of the engine distant and steady. Someone's dog was barking. Normal sounds. Normal life. Mine was anything but normal right now. I was 69 years old. I'd spent my entire adult life avoiding conflict, maintaining peace, being the reasonable one. And now I was deliberately walking into confrontation with my own brother. Not because I wanted to. Because he'd forced it. Because he'd mistaken decades of patience for weakness. Because he'd looked at my cheap suit and my old car and my quiet life and decided I was someone who could be robbed. Monday morning. 9 a.m. Bartlett and Sons, conference room. Hector would be there with his leather portfolio and his fake receipts and his absolute confidence that he'd already won. He'd have witnesses. He'd have documentation. He'd have the entire performance mapped out. What he wouldn't have was the truth. What he wouldn't know was that every word he spoke was being recorded. Every claim he made was being documented. Every lie was becoming evidence. I closed the accordion folder, locked it back in the filing cabinet, climbed the basement stairs one more time. My knees ached. My back was stiff. I was too old for this. But age wasn't weakness. Experience wasn't liability. I'd watched hundreds of cases over 4 decades. Watched people lie and scheme and think they were clever. Watched the system grind them down with procedure and evidence and the cold mechanical enforcement of law. I knew how this worked. Hector didn't. The recorder sat on the counter. I picked it up, checked the tape, replaced it with a fresh one. Checked the battery level. Full charge. I set it back down, placed it where I'd remember to grab it Monday morning. Next to it I placed a pen and a small notepad. Backup. Always have backup. The house was quiet around me. Just the hum of the refrigerator. The tick of the kitchen clock. The distant sound of traffic. I poured myself a glass of water, drank it slowly, rinsed the glass, set it in the dish rack. Routine. Normal. The appearance of a man going through the motions of ordinary life. Underneath, gears were turning. Mechanisms engaging. A trap that had been set months ago was finally, inevitably closing. Monday. 9 a.m. Point of no return. For both of us. Monday morning I woke at 5:30, the alarm clock's mechanical bell rattling on the nightstand, the same clock I'd had since 1983. The house was dark and cold, the thermostat still set to its nighttime temperature of 62 degrees. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, my feet on the cold hardwood floor, feeling the stiffness in my spine, the ache in my hips, the particular heaviness that comes with being nearly 70 and carrying the weight of deliberate confrontation. My father's watch showed 5:32. I'd slept maybe 4 hours, shallow restless sleep interrupted by the sound of my own pulse in my ears. Showered in water that took too long to heat, the pipes groaning. Shaved with the electric razor that was older than some people's marriages, the motor whining, the blades pulling slightly at my skin. Dressed in the same suit from the funeral, the polyester slightly musty even after hanging in the closet. The shirt was clean but the collar was frayed. The tie was the same navy blue with diagonal stripes. I looked like exactly what I was supposed to look like. An old man wearing old clothes to a meeting he didn't understand. In the kitchen I made coffee in the percolator from the 70s, the pot stained brown on the inside, the coffee bitter and strong. Drank it black standing at the counter. Ate 2 pieces of toast with butter, no jam, the bread from the day-old rack at Safeway. Food as fuel. Nothing more. At 7:15 I checked the recorder. Fresh tape loaded. Battery at full charge. I pressed record, let it run for 30 seconds, played it back. My own breathing, amplified and harsh. The sound of the kitchen clock ticking. Clear. Perfect. I placed it in my inside jacket pocket, the weight of it pulling slightly on the fabric. In my other pocket I put the backup recorder, smaller, older, a second insurance policy. In the car I placed my briefcase, the cheap vinyl kind from Walmart, containing the accordion folder, the legal pad, 3 pens. Backup. Always backup. The drive to Bartlett and Sons took 12 minutes. Traffic was light, the morning commute not yet started. The funeral home sat on a quiet street lined with maples, the building itself a converted Victorian house painted pale gray with white trim. Tasteful. Expensive. The kind of place that charged you for grief with a smile. I parked in the back of the lot at 8:47. 13 minutes early. The Civic's engine ticked as it cooled. Through the windshield I could see the building, lights on in the windows, movement inside. Hector's Audi was already there, parked close to the entrance, taking up 2 spaces. Territorial. Aggressive. At 8:55 I got out of the car, briefcase in hand, walked slowly across the parking lot. Let my steps be measured, careful, the gait of an old man worried about falling. Inside the funeral home smelled the same as it had 4 days ago. Lilies and carpet cleaner and that underlying sweetness of chemicals and death. The receptionist, a young woman with too much makeup and a professional smile, directed me to conference room B, down the hall, second door on the left. The door was open. Inside Hector sat at the head of a long table, his leather portfolio spread open like a general's battle map, documents arranged in neat stacks. He wore a different suit today, charcoal gray, probably Armani, or something equally expensive. His tie was burgundy silk. His watch was gold and caught the light from the overhead fluorescence. Next to him sat Monica, scrolling through her phone, her nails painted dark red, clicking against the screen. On his other side was Mr. Bartlett himself, the funeral director, his soft hands folded on the table, his expression sympathetic and complicit. A notary sat in the corner, a middle-aged woman with a stamp and a ledger, ready to make everything official. Terry, Hector stood, gestured to the chair opposite him. Right on time. I'm impressed. I shuffled to the chair, set my briefcase down. With a thump, sat heavily. The chair was cheap, the kind with thin padding and plastic arms. It creaked under my weight. Hector remained standing, hands on the table, leaning forward slightly. The posture of authority. Of control. So, he began, let's get right to it. I've prepared a comprehensive overview of Mom's final expenses. He slid a document across the table, 3 pages stapled together, printed on cream-colored paper with the Bartlett and Sons letterhead. I picked it up with shaking hands, held it close to my face, squinted. The list was itemized. Professional services and staff, $6,200. Casket, mahogany deluxe, $4,800. Burial plot, perpetual care included, $3,500. Flowers, premium arrangement, $1,200. The list went on. Catering. Programs. Death certificates. Music. The total at the bottom read $14,750. Half of that, Hector said, his voice smooth and practiced, comes to $7,375. Your share. As her son. As family. I stared at the number. Felt the weight of the recorder in my jacket pocket, the tape turning silently. 7,000, I repeated, my voice thin and uncertain. That's a lot, Hector. It is, he agreed, sitting back down, his chair expensive and padded, ergonomic. But these were Mom's wishes. She wanted dignity. She wanted respect. This is what that costs. He tapped the paper with his index finger, the nail manicured and clean. Now, I've already paid the full amount to Bartlett here. Out of my own pocket. So what we're doing today is just settling accounts between us. Brothers. Fair and square. I looked at Mr. Bartlett. He nodded, his expression grave. Everything on that invoice is accurate, Mr. Wilcox. Your brother has been most generous in handling the arrangements. Most generous, I echoed. Hector pulled another document from his portfolio. There are also some ancillary expenses. Mom's final medical bills. Prescriptions. Hospice care supplies. He slid the second document across. Another 2 pages. Another list of charges. The total was $3,120. So altogether, Hector said, doing the math out loud like I was too stupid to follow, your total family contribution comes to $10,495. Call it $10,500 even. Round numbers are easier. $10,500, I said. Felt my pulse in my throat. Steady. Controlled. Hector smiled, not warmly. Exactly. Now, I know that's significant. But Mom left assets. The house. Her bank accounts. Once we settle the estate, you'll get your share. This is just the upfront cost. The cost of doing right by her. He leaned forward again, his cologne hitting me across the table, that expensive bergamot and cedar smell that I'd learned to associate with lies. Terry, I need you to write that check today. I've got my own expenses. My own bills. I can't carry this forever. I reached into my jacket as if going for my checkbook. My hand brushed the recorder. Still running. Still documenting. Before I write anything, I said slowly, I just want to make sure I understand. You're saying you paid for all of this? Every item on these lists? Hector's expression flickered, just for a second. Annoyance. Impatience. Yes, Terry. That's what I'm saying. That's what these invoices prove. I have receipts. I have bank statements. I paid for Mom's funeral. Now you need to pay your share. And you're the executor of Mom's estate, I continued, my voice still uncertain, still confused. You filed the paperwork. You have authority over her accounts. That's right. So you'll be handling the distribution of her assets. Her house. Her savings. Everything. Hector's smile returned, confident. Exactly. See. You do understand. It's simple. I handle the complicated stuff. You just need to contribute fairly. I nodded. Slowly, like an old man finally grasping something difficult. Okay. Okay. I want to make sure it's all legal. All proper. It is, Hector said firmly. I've consulted with attorneys. I've filed everything correctly. This is by the book. By the book, I repeated. Then I stood, my knees popping, reached down for my briefcase, lifted it onto the table. The sound of the vinyl case on the wood was loud in the quiet room. There's just one problem, I said, and my voice wasn't shaking anymore. It wasn't thin. It wasn't confused. It was steady. Clear. Cold. Mom already paid for her funeral. The room went silent. Hector's smile froze, then cracked. What? In 2019, I continued, opening the briefcase, pulling out the accordion folder, she prepaid her arrangements with Bartlett and Sons. $6,200. Full payment. I have the certificate. I pulled out the document, placed it on the table, slid it toward Mr. Bartlett. The funeral director's face went pale, bloodless. His soft hands trembled as he picked up the certificate, read it, set it down like it was burning him. That's an old account, Hector stammered. It doesn't apply to no, I said. It applies. It's valid. Certificate number 41873. Paid in full. Which means this invoice is fraudulent. I tapped the itemized list he'd given me. You didn't pay $14,000. You paid nothing. And you're trying to bill me for services that were already covered. Hector's face was red now, splotches spreading from his collar up to his cheeks. Terry, you don't understand how this and this, I continued, pulling out another document, is Mom's last will and testament. Executed September 14, 2025. Filed with the County Probate Office September 18. Case number 2025-Pro-08847. It names me as sole executor. Which means you have no legal authority over her estate. Your petition was fraudulent. I placed the will on the table between us. Hector stared at it like it was a snake. That's not possible. She didn't have a in this, I said, pulling out the executor transfer form, the one I'd signed at the funeral home, is legally void. You cannot transfer executor authority that hasn't been granted yet. Your filing was premature. 9 days before probate opened. Which makes it invalid. Which makes it evidence of fraud. Hector stood abruptly, his chair scraping back. You set me up. You played me. No, I said calmly. You set yourself up. I just documented it. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the recorder, placed it on the table. Pressed stop. The tape mechanism clicked. This device, I said, has been recording since I walked in this room. It recorded you claiming you paid for expenses you didn't pay. It recorded you claiming executor authority you don't have. It recorded you attempting to extort $10,500 from me under false pretenses. That's fraud, Hector. Criminal fraud. His mouth opened and closed, no sound coming out. His face had gone from red to white, the color draining like water from a tub. And just so we're clear, I continued, I also recorded you at the funeral. Recorded you admitting you filed estate paperwork prematurely. Recorded you pressuring me to sign documents under false pretenses. All of it admissible. All of it evidence. The door to the conference room opened. Dorothy Chin walked in, carrying a litigation briefcase, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than everything Hector was wearing combined. Her expression was professional, cold, predatory. She was followed by a man in a cheap suit carrying a badge on his belt. County investigator. Good morning, Dorothy said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Mr. Hector Wilcox." Hector just stared at her, frozen. "I'm Dorothy Chen, attorney for Terrence Wilcox and executor of Margaret Wilcox's estate. This is Investigator Ross from the County District Attorney's Office. We're here regarding your fraudulent estate petition and your attempted theft by deception." She placed her briefcase on the table, opened it with a precise click. "We have documentation proving that you filed a false estate petition claiming your mother died intestate when in fact a will existed and was properly filed. We have evidence that you fraudulently claimed executor authority. We have recordings of you attempting to extort money for expenses that were already paid. And we have multiple witnesses who will testify to your pattern of deception." The investigator stepped forward, his hand resting casually on his belt near his handcuffs. "Mr. Wilcox, I'm going to need you to come with me. We have some questions." Hector's legs seemed to give out. He sank back into his chair, his expensive suit crumpling, his perfect hair suddenly limp with sweat. This is no," I said quietly, and everyone turned to look at me. "This is exactly what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. When you think a cheap suit means a cheap mind. When you forget that the quiet man in the corner spent 43 years learning how the system works." Dorothy pulled out another document, placed it in front of Hector. "This is a restraining order prohibiting you from accessing any of Margaret Wilcox's assets. This is a notice of civil action for attempted estate fraud. And this is a referral to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Your hearing is scheduled for February 10th. Judge Morrison presiding. Same judge who invalidated your fraudulent petition last Friday." Hector looked at me, his eyes wide, desperate. "Terry. Please. I'm your brother." "You were," I said. "Then you tried to rob me. Now you're just evidence." Investigator Ross gestured toward the door. "Let's go, Mr. Wilcox. Now." Hector stood on shaking legs, Monica beside him clutching her phone, her face pale under her makeup. "Mr." Bartlett sat frozen, his soft hands flat on the table, his complicity now documented and exposed. The notary in the corner had already packed her stamp and ledger, was edging toward the door, wanting no part of what she'd just witnessed. They left. Hector stumbling, the investigator's hand on his elbow, Monica clicking behind them on her heels, the sound of her crying echoing down the hall. Dorothy closed her briefcase, looked at me, smiled. "That was textbook, Terry. Absolutely textbook." I gathered my documents, placed them back in the accordion folder, back in the briefcase. 43 years, I said. You learn a few things. We walked out together, through the funeral home that smelled of lilies and lies, into the parking lot where the morning sun was burning off the fog. Hector's Audi sat empty, the investigator's sedan parked behind it, blocking it in. My Civic waited in the back row, patient and unremarkable. Dorothy shook my hand, her grip firm and professional. "The estate will settle in about 6 weeks. Everything goes according to your mother's will. Hector gets nothing. And the criminal case?" She smiled, cold and satisfied. "That's going to take longer. But with the evidence you gathered, he's looking at fraud charges, possibly theft. Best case scenario for him is a plea deal and restitution. Worst case is prison time. Either way, his reputation is destroyed." "Good," I said, and meant it. She drove away in her Mercedes. I got in my Civic, placed the briefcase on the passenger seat, started the engine. It coughed twice before catching, the check engine light glowing steady and familiar on the dashboard. I drove home slowly, the morning traffic building around me, people heading to jobs and lives and normal concerns. I stopped at a red light, watched a young mother in an SUV next to me, her kids in the back seat, arguing over something trivial. Normal life. I'd just destroyed my brother. Methodically. Deliberately. With evidence and procedure and the cold application of law. And I didn't feel guilty. I felt tired. Satisfied. Complete. The light turned green. I drove home. February 10, 2026, Judge Morrison denied Hector's motion to dismiss and referred his case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The hearing lasted 11 minutes. Hector's attorney, expensive and ineffective, tried to argue procedural errors, tried to claim misunderstanding, tried to paint his client as a grieving son who'd made innocent mistakes. Dorothy Chin stood up with the accordion folder, with the recordings, with the timeline of deliberate fraud, and the judge's expression went from neutral to disgusted in the time it took to read the first page. The gavel came down like a guillotine. Case referred. Criminal charges filed. Preliminary hearing set for March 15th. Hector sat at the defendant's table, his expensive suit rumpled now, his perfect hair unwashed, his face the color of spoiled milk. He'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. Monica wasn't with him. She'd filed for divorce on February 3rd, citing irreconcilable differences and seeking to protect her assets from his legal liabilities. Smart woman. Smarter than I'd given her credit for. The district attorney filed formal charges on February 14th. Estate fraud. Attempted theft by deception. Perjury. Filing false documents. 4 counts total, each carrying potential prison time. Hector hired a criminal defense attorney who cost him $40,000 up front, money he had to borrow from someone because his accounts were frozen pending the civil suit. That attorney negotiated for 3 weeks before realizing the evidence was insurmountable and advised a plea deal. Hector refused. Pride. Arrogance. The belief that somehow he could still talk his way out, still perform his way to innocence. The trial was set for May. He'd lose. I knew it. Dorothy knew it. His own attorney probably knew it. But Hector couldn't accept it, couldn't accept that his younger brother, the court clerk, the man in the cheap suit with the old car, had outmaneuvered him completely. Mom's estate settled on March 23rd. The house at 47 Willow Crest Drive sold for $340,000. Her bank accounts totaled $68,000. Her personal property, the furniture and china and the lifetime accumulation of a woman who saved everything, was appraised and distributed according to the will. My cousin Linda got half the proceeds from the house sale, just like Mom wanted. I got the other half plus the accounts plus the personal items I wanted, which wasn't much. Dad's old toolbox from the garage. Mom's recipe box with her handwriting on index cards. The photo albums from when we were kids, back when Hector and I were brothers instead of adversaries. The will's punishment clause was executed exactly as written. Hector James Wilcox receives nothing from this estate and is permanently barred from any claim to my assets. Mom had known. Had seen it coming. Had trusted me to finish what she'd started. I sold her house to a young couple, teachers, both of them, who walked through it with their hands clasped together and their eyes bright with hope. They had a baby on the way. They promised to take care of the garden Mom had planted, the roses she'd tended for 30 years. I gave them a discount, $2,000 below asking price, because they reminded me of my parents in 1956, young and hopeful and building something. The money from the estate sat in my checking account at First National, the same bank where Hector had tried to claim control. I didn't need it. My pension covered my bills. My house was paid off. My car ran fine despite the check engine light. But I had it now, a cushion, security, the knowledge that if something broke I could fix it without worry. On April 8th Hector called me. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail, his voice cracking, desperate. Terry, please. I'm sorry. I made mistakes. I was stupid. But I'm your brother. We're family. Please don't let them send me to prison. Please. I deleted it without finishing. Family was a word that meant something once. Now it was just sound. On April 15th I received a letter from Hector's attorney. A settlement offer. Hector would plead guilty to reduce charges in exchange for probation and restitution. He would pay back the costs I'd incurred for legal representation, approximately $12,000. He would issue a formal written apology. He would agree to a permanent no-contact order. In exchange, I would write a letter to the court requesting leniency. I wrote back through Dorothy. No deal. No leniency. No contact ever. Let the trial proceed. Let the evidence speak. Let justice be mechanical and thorough and utterly without mercy. Hector's attorney called Dorothy 3 times trying to negotiate. She shut him down each time with the same words. My client has no interest in your client's rehabilitation. The trial was scheduled for May 12th. I didn't plan to attend. Dorothy would handle it. The evidence would handle it. I'd done my part. Now I was sitting in my house on a Thursday afternoon in late April, the windows open, the smell of cut grass coming in on the breeze. Spring in full swing, the maples leafing out, the neighbor's dog barking at something invisible, the sound of kids on bikes in the distance. Normal sounds. Normal life. I was in my basement office, the filing cabinet open, the accordion folder in front of me. I'd added a new section. Final documents. The settlement statement from Mom's estate. The court order invalidating Hector's petition. The referral for criminal prosecution. The no-contact order. Everything documented. Everything filed. Everything complete. On the workbench next to the folder sat a framed photograph I'd brought down from the living room. Mom and Dad, 1965, standing in front of their first house. Dad in his work clothes, Mom in a house dress, both of them young and tired and proud. I was a toddler in Mom's arms, maybe 2 years old, my face blurry from squirming. Hector wasn't born yet. It was just us. Just family before family became complicated. Mom's face in that photo was serious, determined, the same expression she'd had in Dorothy Chen's office when she'd signed her will and looked at me and said, "Prove him wrong." I'd proved it. Not with anger or violence or emotional outbursts. With documentation. With procedure. With the patient application of rules that most people ignored until those rules destroyed them. 43 years as a court clerk. 43 years of watching the system work. Not always fairly. Not always quickly. But always methodically. Always inevitably. I closed the accordion folder, labeled it in black marker. Estate of Margaret Rose Wilcox, closed April 2026. Filed it in the cabinet between Dad's estate from 2009 and my own will, updated last year, simple and clear. When I die, everything goes to Linda's kids, my second cousins, good people who send me Christmas cards and call me Uncle Terry even though the relationship is more distant than that. Not to Hector. Never to Hector. Even in death I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. I locked the cabinet, climbed the stairs, my knees protesting less today than they had a month ago. Maybe because the weight was gone. The burden of pretending. The exhaustion of playing weak. I was done performing. Done being underestimated. Done being the quiet one who absorbed disrespect and smiled and said nothing. In the kitchen I made coffee in the old percolator, poured it into the mug I'd had since 1987, sat at the Formica table by the window. The afternoon light came in golden and warm. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. My father's watch on my wrist showed 4:37. Time measured. Time documented. Time that couldn't be argued with or manipulated or lied about. Outside, Bill Kowalski was washing his car in his driveway, the hose spraying in the sun, making rainbows. He saw me through the window, waved. I waved. Back. He'd called me 2 weeks ago, apologetic, ashamed. "Terry, I'm sorry. I didn't know what Hector was doing. I thought I was helping." "You don't owe me an apology," I'd told him. "You didn't do anything wrong." He'd been a witness to Hector's performance, nothing more. He'd believed what he was supposed to believe. That was the point of the performance. People ask me sometimes, the few who know the story, if I feel guilty. If I regret destroying my brother. If family means nothing to me. I tell them the truth. I didn't destroy Hector. He destroyed himself. I just documented it. And family means something. It meant something to Mom when she wrote her will. It meant something to me when I filed it. It meant something when I honored her wishes exactly as she'd intended. What it didn't mean was immunity. Didn't mean tolerance for theft. Didn't mean I had to smile and nod while someone robbed me and called it love. I spent 69 years being kind. Being patient. Being the reasonable one who avoided conflict and kept the peace and let insults slide off. Hector looked at those 69 years and saw weakness. Saw a target. Saw someone who could be victimized without consequence. He was wrong. Kindness isn't weakness. Patience isn't stupidity. Quiet doesn't mean powerless. It just means careful. Methodical. Waiting for the right moment. I finished my coffee, rinsed the mug, set it in the dish rack. The house was quiet around me. No threats. No performances. No brother calling with fake concern and real schemes. Just peace. Just the life I'd built, simple and cheap and mine. Through the window the sun was lower now, the shadows getting long, the golden light turning orange. Somewhere across town Hector was probably sitting in his attorney's office, probably going over trial strategy, probably still believing he could somehow win. He couldn't. The evidence was absolute. The timeline was documented. The recordings were clear. He'd lied under oath, filed false documents, attempted theft, all of it recorded and witnessed and provable. The system would grind him down with the same mechanical inevitability it had ground down hundreds of others I'd watched over 4 decades. And I'd go on living my quiet life. Mowing my lawn with my ancient push mower. Clipping coupons. Driving my Civic with its glowing check engine light. Wearing my cheap suits. Looking like exactly what people expected an old retired court clerk to look like. Harmless. Forgettable. Weak. Let them think it. Let them underestimate. Let them mistake the surface for the substance. Better that way. Safer. The ones who saw deeper, who understood that patience was strategy and quiet was strength, those people never tried to rob me. Never tried to exploit me. Never mistook my kindness for permission. Hector had. Once. That was enough. The phone rang. Unknown number. I didn't answer. If it was important they'd leave a message. If it was Hector calling from some borrowed phone, some last desperate attempt at reconciliation, I didn't want to hear it. There was nothing left to say. The trial would say it all. The clock ticked forward. The sun continued its arc toward the horizon. Another day ending. Another day of peace purchased with 43 years of learning and 2 months of careful execution. My father's watch showed 5:15. Time for dinner. Something simple. Leftovers probably. The chicken-eyed roasted Sunday, still good, still plenty. Waste not, want not. Mom's voice in my head. Mom's lessons. Mom's trust that I'd do the right thing when it mattered. I had. The system had. Justice, mechanical and thorough and blind to family ties and fake sympathy and expensive suits. Justice that only cared about evidence and procedure and the documented truth. I stood, my knees popping but not aching, walked to the refrigerator, old and humming and inefficient but still working. Like me. Old. Simple. Underestimated. And absolutely, ruthlessly effective when pushed too far. Never mistake kindness for weakness. 43 years I lived that truth quietly. 2 months I proved it decisively. Now I was done proving anything. Back to quiet. Back to simple. Back to peace. The system would handle the rest.